And we'll go through some of that today. I'm not going to go through kind of the building of a pitch deck slide by slide necessarily, although I will cover a lot of the common slides that are included and some things to consider on those slides. There's so many great resources, and I'm happy to share some of those with you on the internet, you know, with examples of both videos of people pitching as well as the decks. And as you are thinking about how to construct your story, I totally encourage you to go and, you know, watch some of those and look at other people's things. But I think the biggest caution there is just making sure to keep it your own, because this is really about your company and your company's journey. So let's dive. Oh, and I don't know. Well, Laura introduced me. If you have any questions about the growth factor, we can talk about that at the end. But it's what's that?
You're not. I'm trying to quit looking for you.
Oh, sorry.
Let's see what's going on there.
So no worries. The Growth Factory is a nonprofit accelerator with an accompanying early stage venture fund that is going to be launching in the Sacramento region, focused on investing in and accelerating really cool founding teams from the greater Sacramento region working on venture backable companies. So happy to share more details about the program, the application process, and all of that if we have some time at the end, or I think Laura has my contact information and you can feel free to reach out to me directly as well. So we're looking at, like, what is your company's story? So how many, I can't do a show of hands, sorry, I'm used to doing this in person too. I'm assuming that most people on this call are founders and or CEOs of the ventures that they're looking to raise funds for. So I'll start by saying that one of the most important jobs that the CEO has is to be able to communicate the story of his or her company well. It's, you know, a pitch is not just used for investors for fundraising, right? It's used to, the kind of the structure of the story is used to attract customers, employees, partners, and investors, right? And so this story isn't just about building a 10-slide deck that can get you a check. It's really about, you know, who is your company and what it's about, and how do you build, you know, your community around that story. So I love this picture just because I think of, you know, a startup pitch as a persuasive argument in a sense, right? I think of it as, you know, you have to create a credible and defensible case for your company. And you have to persuade people that what you're working on is, you know, worth their time, energy, and money. And, you know, you have, in order to do that, you have to build, you know, a case that's evidence-backed. What it is not is a data dump. And this is something that I think probably Sunny spoke about too, Laura, in his presentation with the 54 slide deck or whatever, right? It's not throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, into a slide presentation to kind of like, you know, dump on your audience, right? It's a very well crafted and oftentimes concise story about what you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to do that and why it's worth, you know, people's time and money. Oops, sorry, there we go. I also love this slide because it really demonstrates, you know, if you watch a good movie, you know, you'll be, or read books a lot, you'll be really familiar with this cadence, right? And really it's like the journey that we want to take our audience on, right? Starting with, you know, kind of the world as it is now. And typically there's, you know, the world as it is now, and then something happens, right? And there's this inciting incident that causes you to take action in some way. It surfaces a problem that you have to overcome, right? And then you go on this journey to overcome that problem and probably hit some obstacles along the way, but ultimately you find the solution, right? There's some, breakthrough moment, right? And the sun comes out and things get better. And then, after that happens, there's the world after, the instance. So there's, in startup land, it's like the world as it exists now before your solution comes, to light. And then there's this transformation that happens to a world post your solution, which is conceivably much better, right? And that's the journey we want to take our investors on. I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions yet, or comments, or what is the hardest piece of this for you guys as you think about like telling your story? Where do you get stuck? I'm going to give you a second to think about that, because I'd really like to hear what part of this doesn't, isn't intuitive or feels hard to you.
Yeah, and you could go ahead and unmute yourself if you want to answer this question.
I don't know if,
Yeah.
if you have, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, what you just said.
I think for myself, it's really like linking my solution to the problem and making sure that it's coming through as like an antibiotic and not a vitamin, like a good to have.
So looking at like making it that painkiller, or versus like the need to have versus nice to have kind of.
Exactly,
story.
like a painkiller versus a vitamin.
And what can you tell us a little bit more about that? What maybe you can tell us what, have you gotten feedback that it feels like, oh, it's not essential, it's just it's an add-on? Have you gotten that kind of feedback before?
Yeah, I think the feedback I get is that it's somebody else's problem. It's not their problem. And ultimately, like what my tool does is it's a real-time analytics that works towards science-based targets. So climate change is has been proven that we ultimately have to go to a net zero by 2050. But when it's not regulatory focused, or it's not demanded by investors. So if I ultimately am being pushed into the public sector, like the publicly traded companies, because they're the only ones that are looking at monitoring technology, versus everyone has like a role to play. So what I say is that it's nice to have to see if there's risks around modern day slavery in the supply chain, or unethical vendors. But at this point, it's more of a nice to have than like an operational efficiency piece.
And are the companies that you're working with selling products to consumers mostly, or is it just, to other B2B or B2C or both?
Both. And that's,
okay.
Yeah, that's the piece, is that as of right now, globally, like scope 3 emissions, and I know this is getting technical, isn't monitored, but that's where all the greenhouse gases are coming from. So like I said, that's the biggest hurdle for me, is that everyone knows this is a problem, but they think it's someone else's problem, and they don't want to invest to be kind of like a first movers, or from a reputational risk, or ultimately from an impact piece. They're just assuming that somebody else is going to do it, or they'll do it when it's mandated or governed, rather than from a stakeholder perspective.
Thank you. This is great. Thank you for sharing that. So let's take that as an example and look at the world as it exists today, with a lack of transparency or insight on that data, right? And then think about, like, what would the world look like after your solution? and who cares about that, right? And I think that those are some areas that you can dig into in terms of like, what does the world look like after your solution? How has the world changed for the companies that you're selling to? So your customer, what is your customer's world? What is the change in your customer's life, their business, like whatever, right? After your solution is implemented, and why do they care about that? Right. And I think spending some time on like putting yourselves in their shoes and understanding like, today it may be a nice to have, but your vision and the trend that, kind of the world is taking, the trend that we're on is that this is going to be, I think, increasingly mandatory, right? And increasingly important. And so look at like today's solution, but also look at the vision that you have for your company and the role you want your company to play in the transformation, right? And so it's not just about this product and this solution today, but it's about the way that you're trying to change the world too, right? And so I think as you think about your story's journey, how does your customer become a hero in that journey, transforming from today to tomorrow, and what are the benefits to them? So maybe thinking around that. And, and Laura, by the way, is like expert at this too. So Laura, feel free to like jump in and, add or, disagree or whatever to some of this. But I love that you shared that. Thank you.
Yeah. So anybody else want to answer the question? And if you want to, you could raise your Zoom hand or you could let us know in the chat. Steve, I think you had some feedback on that. Did you want to share? Oh, there you go.
Is that me, Steve?
It says, oh, I see. It wasn't a question. It was an answer to if you were a founder or not. Okay.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Okay, sorry.
No worries.
Great. We can move on. And if people have questions or comments along the way, feel free to jump in. So this is a little bit about what we just talked about with Amanda, but identifying your main character, who is your ideal customer. And this is really, the story is really about them, right? It's about their journey and how your solution is a piece of the transformation that they're going to undergo, right? And I think the why now piece is something that, is not always easily identifiable, but thinking about why do you need to take action now, or why is this main character, your customer, compelled to take action now? And then we talked about the promised land, like what will it look like for them, if they use your solution, how will their world change? And, what obstacles do they have to overcome, and how does your product or service help them do that? And then we'll talk about the importance of the evidence that you can offer to demonstrate that your solution is a good fit. This is a very high level example, but I really like it. It's a simple exercise that you all can do to get started. It's an Airbnb example, but the idea is, taking your main character, the problem, and the timeliness of that problem, and then asking the question, what if we could, and then your solution, what would the world look like? And so I won't read it, you guys can read that, but it's a really simple kind of Mad Lib exercise that you can do to start brainstorming, like, how do you begin to build the building blocks of the story that you want to tell? And this is oftentimes, by the way, a great opening to your pitch. So the things that at the end of the day, you need to answer in your deck. And for me, the problem/opportunity is like, for me, it's one of the most important pieces. It's typically at the front of your deck. And it's where, if you aren't connecting with your audience or the person that you're speaking with about your company, if you're not connecting with them on this problem, the rest of your presentation almost doesn't matter, right? Because they don't care, right? So why should your audience care about the problem that you're solving or the opportunity that you've identified? And this is really, it's a human connection, right? It's really understanding the person's journey through whatever they are trying to address and connecting on a human level. And I think like from a presentation standpoint, you have those first 30 seconds, I think it's less than that, it's like 10 seconds, right? To really make an impression or capture your audience's attention, and then pull them in with a compelling problem so that they stay with you for the duration of your pitch, right? But that why should your audience care? That's where I spend probably 80% of my time when I work with founders on their decks is, are we communicating the problem in the most impactful way possible? And it typically, like I was saying to Amanda, it's not just today's problem, but it's climate change, right? For you, Amanda, it's like the larger problem that you're trying to solve. And then the subset of that is this customer's journey as it's connected to how you're changing the world. Why now is huge in terms of, a lot of times, it's not the product or the founding team, but it's the market and the timing that causes a startup to fail. And so really having a clear message around why now is the time for the solution and why now is important. And then, why should your audience believe that you can do this, right? And this goes back to that slide at the beginning around building a credible, defensible, and fundable case. So the first part, the why should your audience care, that's from the first couple of slides of your deck, and that's setting up the story of the company and why you're doing what you're doing and why it's important for other people to know about this. And then really the remainder of the deck is about execution. And that's this, why should your audience believe that you have figured out how to bring the solution to market. And then finally, an investor should walk away from your presentation understanding why your team is the best team to execute on this. So when I think about at a very high level, the pitches that I listen to and the founders that I work with, these are the things that I want them to be thinking about as they craft their story, because these are the things that are going to be remembered by the investor, right? They're not going to remember the very specific numbers that you put on any one slide. They're going to remember how the story comes together in a cohesive and compelling way. So I'm going to pause there and see if you guys have any questions or comments, agree, disagree, any experience in doing this and getting feedback around these things.
I think what stuck out for me. Hello, can you guys hear me? I think what stuck out for me is emphasize more on the story, because obviously initially you're trying to just create this imagination and let them go along the ride with you, right? When I know lots of time what I tend to do is, like you said earlier, like you just throw them with numbers and why the situation makes sense, financially, when it's more than that, right?
Yeah, thank you. I agree. Because we're humans first, right? Investors, partners, employees second, and humans love stories. And that's how we remember things. Awesome. So like I said at the beginning, I'm not necessarily going to go through like every single slide you should have in your deck and, how to construct it. There's a ton of great resources online that will break that down for you very, very well. And so I'm going to take the time to look at definitely some of the common pitch deck components and typically what's on them. But what I'd like to talk about is, what is your goal for that slide and how does that slide fit into the story that you're trying to tell? And so we'll focus on that. Stop me with any questions as we go through it. We already talked about this. The problem, what's the problem, right? The inciting incident. Oftentimes, the pitches that I hear, especially with kind of first-time founders or founders in the Sacramento region for sure, is the problem is personal, right? It's something that you've experienced in your life, and you are a problem solver, which is why you're likely an entrepreneur, and you've chosen to tackle this problem because it was really frustrating or important or impactful to you to begin with. And then maybe you talked to other people and identified that it was also bothering other people. And that's probably what got you started on your journey. And so oftentimes it is 100% positive and appropriate to include that personal why as a part of the company's like founding story and the reason that this problem is being tackled in the first place. The other thing I'll say about a pitch deck is this is something you'll be working on for like the next 3 to 5 years, right? Like this is not a one and done kind of thing, right? Your company is gonna evolve, your products are gonna evolve, your funding rounds are gonna evolve, right? So what your first pitch deck looks like is not going to be what your last pitch deck looks like, and it's just never done. So you know, the further down the road the company gets, perhaps that founding story, you know, is not as critical. But when you're first getting started, oftentimes it's a really compelling piece of the story, and it also helps people understand your level of commitment to getting this company off the ground and to addressing a problem that's very important to you as well. So, okay. Same thing on the solution. How has, you know, just thinking about like, how did you think through, you know, the problem when you looked at it, and then what were the what if questions, like the Airbnb quote, what if we designed, right? What were the what if questions you asked yourself? What if the world had blah, 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 or what if we did it this way, right? And those are, answering those questions resulted in the solution that is addressing your customer's pain. So this is not necessarily your product slide, it's the solution. It's like, how are you fixing the problem? And then the next slide will dive more deeply into the actual product. So this is what the world looks like after, you know, the problem is solved. It's a little more high level, if that makes sense. And then you can dive into your product with, you know, the details of what it does, how does it work, have you tested it, how do you know it works? Depending on the stage, you'll have different levels of information here. I don't think I went, well, I don't know, we'll go through it. Oftentimes, you know, starting to differentiate or share, you know, why this is so unique or different than what exists on the market already. That's what this is, your secret sauce. So one of the things here that I really want to point out, and this is the secret sauce, and I'll say it again on the competition slide, and something that becomes really evident, as you know, Laura's probably seen, I don't know, how many pitches have you seen, Laura? A couple thousand at this point?
Probably at least that.
Hey, Marcy. Yeah, don't worry about it.
I was doing a lot because I think the magazine stuff.
So anyway, one of the things that becomes really evident pretty early on in a pitch is how much groundwork a founder has done to understand the market, right? And this is one of the areas that comes up because, you know, this is often a place where I hear the only, or no one has ever, or what have you. And those are really big statements that I generally encourage founders not to use in their deck, because you can do your research, and you should do your research to position your product in the market or to understand how you're uniquely different. But it is really hard to know about every company in the world. And the number of times that I've heard a founder say that in a pitch, and someone in the room is Googling it as they speak and pulls up a competitor that the founder didn't know about, right? And so here what you're really focusing on is like why you think, you know, what you've built is, you know, just really great. And, you know, but don't use the onlys or no ones or, you know, the ultimatums or anything like that. it can eat away at your credibility pretty early and on in the pitch if somebody is in the audience Googling, and I've definitely seen that happen. Same for this one on the research piece. You're not going to get this right. We're not looking for a right answer here. We're looking for your best estimate with demonstration that you've thought it through and you've done the research to create to kind of back into like what your market size will be, right? You're not going to I was just talking to a company earlier today, and they are so diligent about their market research, and they're so worried about having the exact right number on the slide. And this is one of those things that the investor isn't going to remember the exact number on the slide. They're trying to figure out, is this a big market or a small market? You know, is this a market where you can tackle a piece of this market to make enough money that this makes you an investable company, right? And so really the part of the story that you're telling here is that this goes kind of hand in fist with the problem slide, is that this is a big enough problem for enough people that this is an investable venture. And that's ultimately what we're trying to get to here.
Monique, I have
pause again for any questions. Yeah.
I have a question for you. So, well, first, I think it's possible that there's some people with us who don't know what a TAM, a SAM, and a SUM are. So maybe you could explain that. And then also, I know we have a couple of nonprofits here, and I wondered if you could just put a twist on market size on how they would, how that slide would be different for them than from a for-profit.
Yeah, thanks for both of those questions. So on the first one, total addressable market, and then there's the obtainable market, serviceable, attainable market, and serviceable addressable market, right? And so really, I think that the total addressable market is like everybody that would, you know, I guess let's use ice cream for an example. If you were selling an ice cream product, you know, some people might say like the total addressable market is, you know, everybody that eats dessert in the world or something like that, right? It's like a big number of people that might consume your ice cream, right? And then, you know, the next kind of layer down are like maybe like all the ice cream eaters in, you know, the United States. And then the obtainable market is like, we're a California-based company, we're starting in Sacramento. I think I can, you know, do X, Y, and Z and get like, you know, 0.1% of all the ice cream eaters in the US, and we're going to start with the Sacramento market or whatever. So it's just like, how do you start to carve out like everybody in the world that might like your product? Then you know, there's typically a smaller piece of people who really have a more specific affinity for what you're doing. And then what percentage of those do you think that you can actually go out and acquire as customers? So that's that piece. And like I said, those are all, you're making assumptions and estimates. Those numbers are numbers that you should seek to identify. But please like understand that you're not going to have like a right answer. You're going to do your best estimates based on the research that you do and be able to explain how you got to those numbers. From a nonprofit standpoint, that's a great question. And typically we look at this as like how many people are facing these challenges, right? And so if you're serving a specific community, that would be boxed in by like, let's just use Sacramento for an example. You know, if you were saying, you know, we're a nonprofit that's addressing, you know, people who experience homelessness, you know, you're going to have in the Sacramento region, you might have some much more specific data on that. And you can go out and do the research to say there are currently, you know, what, I don't even know, the number's really high, but like 3,000 people experiencing homelessness in the city of Sacramento, right? And so what we're just trying to do is understand here how big is the problem or opportunity that you're addressing. And for, you know, venture backable startups, it has to be big. Otherwise, you know, it's not worth the investors' time or money typically to make the investment to yield the returns that they need to provide to their LPs. This is a big one. You have a great idea. Can you make money on it, right? And so without this piece, really not much else matters to your investors, right? And so demonstrating that you've thought through the business model and how do you make money from your customers. You know, later in the deck, you can also include financials. Typically, you do that in longer pitches or one-on-one conversations. You can certainly have that information in your archive, but knowing, you know, at a high level, you know, this is how we make money. I like to see this on a customer by customer basis, like how much is each customer essentially, what is the model for one customer to do business with you? And then you can do the multiplication after that if you get, you know, 20,000 customers or 20 million customers or what have you. This is another one that absolutely has to do with execution. And this is an area that I feel like teams, it's interesting in this region, we see a lot of teams that maybe have a technical founder, but not a lot of sales or biz dev experience or marketing experience. Or sometimes you see teams with a founder that understands the problem and has good sales and marketing experience, and they're looking for a technical co-founder. So I often see teams that have one or the other. This piece is so important, right? Sales is really hard, and it's pretty essential to growing your company. So, you know, really thinking through a plan for reaching that target market that you identified. And if you don't have a plan or a team member with a strong sales or marketing background, you need to find somebody who can help you with this. Even if it's an advisor that can help you develop the plan, which would include a hiring plan for people who can run this for your company. It's just a really, really, really critical piece. You can have the best idea and product. If you can't sell it, you don't have a company. So you have to, you know, demonstrate that you understand that and that you have a plan to build this function within your company. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Does this feel like sales? Oftentimes, the go-to-market piece on a lot of founders' slides is oftentimes maybe not super thorough. Is this an area that people feel strong in, or have recommendations for what's worked for them, or is this something that you feel like, no, this is really a challenging piece of the story for me?
Yeah, this is. I think this is a challenging piece for me to find the customers and building a relationship with people as a co-founder, going out and as you're doing the leg work and just trying to build relationships and they don't get back to you. It kind of makes things difficult. So
yeah, it can feel discouraging sometimes at the beginning, especially just trying to build a customer base. Has anyone found, you know, like tips and tricks that you found as an early stage founder? Maybe you don't even fully have your product yet, for engaging with customers or potential customers that you'd like to share. And here, what I will say about this piece too is a lot of times we see companies that don't have customers yet. But what they'll do here is demonstrate that they've had a lot of conversations with people who would be their ideal customer kind of persona. And they demonstrate here that, you know, maybe they had a landing page, like, would you buy this? And, you know, whatever. And they got 1,000 people to go to the landing page and 100 people to click on the link. And so they're able to demonstrate, you know, that there is interest and that they're going to continue to build on these, you know, digital marketing or what have you activities to go acquire actual customers. So even if you don't have a product that's in the market yet, there's stuff that you can do and you can test that you can pull into this slide so that you have a story to tell. Any thoughts on that before we go to the next slide?
I have a thought, and I think it's more for, this is Laura, the early days. We have a guy who sometimes teaches, he coaches, his job is to coach enterprise product startup founders in sales. And one of the things that he says is that, you know, as the founder, that you have to at least make some of the initial sales, because this is how you're going to find out if what you're building is even what customers want. So that it could be a problem if you outsource sales too early. You might end up building and launching a product that doesn't really have a market, that doesn't have product market fit.
I love that. And I think you're totally, I totally agree with that early on. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And even like later down the road, staying in touch with that as the founder and CEO, right? Like understanding that is good. But you definitely need somebody who knows how to execute on and to build kind of a scalable sales and marketing effort at some point. Yeah.
For sure.
So like the secret sauce slide, the competitive analysis slide is really saying, I understand the market and our position and value in it. And so again, to me, this is a huge credibility slide because it means you've done your homework and that you are really familiar with the space that you're starting to enter, even if you don't have a deep background of expertise or experience in a market. You've taken the time to do your research. You've talked to enough people to understand, you know, kind of where you fall within the market and what your positioning is and what your value is and how you, I mean, this is very critical, even in building your marketing messaging at some point as you go out and try and differentiate yourself among your competition. So reiterating that no one else is doing this is very rarely a true statement. So be very careful about saying stuff like that, because I do think it's a credibility hit when that's not true, right? And while we want to be very kind of optimistic and visionary in the work that we're doing and present in a very positive manner, we also want to make sure that we're establishing our credibility along the way. And we do that by doing our research and, you know, presenting information that we feel, you know, pretty confident in and leaving room for, you know, additional information to inform us as we go along. This slide is typically, you know, the matrix, you know, with an XY axis of, you know, a couple, you know, two different variables. Oftentimes, you know, price and quality are two that are used. And so you'll see, again, like I encourage you to go look at other slide decks. You'll see that used in so many. And then the other one that I often see is, you know, the competitors along the top of the table, the features and benefits, you know, down the side, and the check marks as to kind of who has what. So both of those are pretty commonly used to help position your company in the space that you're going to be operating in. Why you? Especially in the early stages of a company, there is just so little to really evaluate you on, right? You may not have a fully functioning product. You don't have any sales. You know, you haven't built your marketing assets except for this pitch deck yet, right? So what is an investor investing in? They're investing in you. And so helping to make the case for why you and your team are really ready to move this opportunity forward, and that you're committed, that your founding team has some chemistry and the ability to work together and work through difficult times, which you will most certainly face on this journey, that you're coachable. And by coachable, I don't mean that you take all the advice you're given and do it. I just mean that you're open to feedback and consider advice that is given, not that you have to go do everything your mentors or investors tell you to do. So this is a really important slide, especially early on, because there isn't a lot of other stuff to evaluate you on. oftentimes on this slide, you'll see people share, build their own credibility by sharing, universities they've graduated from, IP that they've developed in other situations, corporates that they've worked for in the space, awards that they've won, right? So there's a lot of different ways to very quickly start to talk about who's on your team. I think the other piece here is, how balanced is your team and what's missing. And it's okay, there's going to be stuff missing, right? It's okay that there is, but taking a moment to talk about how you're going to address that is also okay. We're building out our advisory board. We're, we have a hiring plan, so there's some things that you can talk about that will help people understand that that it's going to, kind of take an army to move this forward at some point, and that you're thinking about who that's going to be for your company. So that is, like we said at the beginning, this is one of the key questions that you need to answer during the presentation. And for the growth factory, I'll tell you, it's probably the most important one, right? This is the piece that I know our team remembers. It's about the people, right? And so definitely, don't be shy about telling us how awesome you are, but, and why, and how passionate you are about working on the company that you're developing.
Renee has a question. Do you want to
Yeah.
ask it, Renee?
Sure. I'm sorry for the typo. I hurt my back today, and so I'm not very mobile right now. But so I am in the process of building a team, but it's part of what I'm looking for an investor for is to assist with that, because I've built teams before. I've been in business for a long time, and I understand what it really takes to get good quality people. And I'm not exactly sure how to present that in the pitch.
I love that you're mindful of that, right? And so I think, in many ways, what you just said is, look, I'm an experienced team builder and it's difficult to find great people. Here are the kinds of people I'm looking for. Part of, how we're thinking about the investors that we bring on board is, how well, connected they are and how they can help us build our team, right? Because at the end of the day, I mean, it definitely in pitches always feels like, you're selling to the investor, but you're also evaluating. And this is something that I talk about a lot is, you are also evaluating the people you're inviting into your company, including your investors, right? And, so the value that they bring to the table is important to you. And I think you can communicate that in a way that demonstrates, you're a seasoned leader and team builder. And, you really care about building a quality team for this company and are looking for assistance in finding, XYZ positions, that have, that are a culture fit and a quality fit for what you're trying to build. And you know what? That's a great thing to say in a deck or in a pitch, because even if somebody in the room isn't going to write you a check, you've just communicated something that they can help you with. Okay. Right. And so oftentimes, there will be other people in the room that say, hey, connect with me afterwards. I have a person in mind for you that I'd like to connect you with, and you never know. Right. And so, but just demonstrating that you understand the importance and that you are developing a plan, but that there's ways that, investors and mentors and others in the room could potentially contribute.
Good. So then what I'm understanding you're saying is it's okay to just put right in the deck that, is my team building partner in this room? And kind of,
I would say that. I mean, I wouldn't write it on the slide, but yeah, it's okay. It is okay to say that's part of what you're looking for. I wouldn't position it as, their job essentially, like, oh, you're investing in me and then you're going to go find my teammates. I would position it as you are building a team and how important that is, and are looking for, certainly to expand your network to be able to find the best people. And one way to do that is through your investment partners.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Monique, something I've seen that I thought was really helpful because I'm in the same space is I've seen an org chart with just like placeholders of the roles that will exist
Yep.
at that C-level suite, and then a description of their skill set, even though they haven't been filled in yet.
Yep. I love that. And again, some of this stuff is going to depend on how much time you have to pitch. So sometimes you're given a little more time than others. And I think in instances where you have a little more time, you know, adding a little bit about this, and I think an org chart is a fantastic idea, you know, is good. You know, if you're doing a 3-minute pitch or a 5-minute pitch at Big Bang or whatever, you know, then, you know, that's the other thing. And we'll talk about that at the end, but just knowing your audience and knowing your time slot so that you can make sure you get the most compelling or urgent pieces of your pitch into the story during the time that you're allotted.
And then alternatively, could you also include like your board of advisory there? Like if you don't have a
100%.
staff team yet,
Yes.
you could show in terms of like mentors and sponsors.
Yes. Absolutely. Your ability to attract people to support you in that capacity is important. And those people, if they're bringing real value, even if it's just the ability to, you know, introduce you to someone within their network or whatever, even if they're not super hands-on, that's, yeah. And you know, again, depending on the industry and the company and that person's, you know, clout, it's just a credibility builder for you.
I wanted to interject something, and you mentioned it a little bit, Monique. You said, I wouldn't write that on the slide. I would say that. And one of the things that we see, like with someone's first pitch deck, is it's got way too many words on it. And I would just remind people that the information that you're saying, it should be in your pitch. That doesn't mean it should be written on your pitch deck, but it should be something that you say. And something should be on your pitch deck, but not everything. Your pitch deck shouldn't be, you know, too much text.
Yeah, don't copy the format of this pitch deck for your deck. I have way too much text on these slides. I was thinking about that last night. I was like, well, it's because I send it out after, so I was my notes. But
no, it's
but Laura's
perfect for
100%
this.
right.
Yeah.
No, Laura,
yeah.
but yeah, no, 100%, you don't want people reading your deck when you're presenting your story. You want them totally dialed into what you're saying, right? And the deck is there to help guide you, to provide a little structure, to provide some reference, or, you know, oftentimes, especially with consumer brands, it's like a really great way to show off your aesthetic and your brand, I think, you know, and to demonstrate your chops in building something that is compelling. You know, for your customers, but yeah, simple. I agree. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on your financial projections and metrics. There's the joke up and to the right. You know, it's like if you have anything other than the J curve, like you're, you know, it doesn't matter, right? But I think that really, you know, everybody expects projections to change. Everybody expects the projections to change. So it's really, again, around understanding the assumptions of what went into building your projections and being able to communicate them. And really, this is another credible and defensible piece where it's like, you know, if you, and this slide is often connected to your market sizing slide, right? And so, you know, you need the numbers to make sense. And everybody understands that those numbers will change, but you have to demonstrate that, you know, you have enough, a large enough market size, the ability to go capture a significant piece of it to help generate revenues that are going to be high growth if it's a venture backable company. So, and that then therefore means that you're up and to the right. And I think the biggest mistake I see on this slide is people, you know, not understanding the assumptions that went into building it. And when questions are asked, they're not ready to communicate why the numbers on the slides are what they are. And again, it's not about the very specific number, but it's about kind of the path. So again, do your homework, take some time to understand, you know, why you think those numbers are where they're at, and then go from there. Oftentimes there'll be milestones, you know, where we're, you know, and this to me is, you know, where we've been, where we are, and where we will be going, you know, and it's really to demonstrate that you are execution oriented, action based, you know. It varies depending on industry. If you're a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company, you know, the milestones are oftentimes much farther apart, or they're, you know, there's a much longer timeline on that slide than, you know, if you're a consumer facing app, for example. So, you know, it's, again, there's no one right size or one right, you know, time frame for all companies, but what you're really trying to demonstrate here is that you are consistently making progress, that your team, you and your team are action and execution oriented, and that you understand what your next key milestones are in order to continue to move the company forward. And often those next key milestones often are tied to why you're fundraising, and the fundraising is hopefully designed to help you achieve those milestones. If you're raising an investment and you're in a pitch where you're allowed to share this information, you can include how much you've raised, how much you're raising, and you can include any exit strategy or strategic partners or M&A targets that you might have. I think it, you know, people have a varied opinion on how detailed you should get about that here, but you know, it just, again, know your audience, know the venue that you're pitching in, and know if this is appropriate to put in there. And then we're coming to a close. We're wrapping up the pitch. A lot of founders I see take like really a lot of care in that first, you know, opening problem statement and introduction to themselves and their team, which is awesome. And then what happens a lot of times in the venues that I see is we oftentimes it's in a pitch competition, and there's been a time allotted and the founder didn't practice enough, and they run out of time. And it's always like, you know, because then there's, you know, this like, I'm going to speed it up and talk like double time, you know, to get through the last 3 slides, or, oh, I was going to say, but I didn't get to it, and all that kind of stuff. And then it just kind of fizzles out at the end. And understandable, but don't do that, okay? So if you know the timing ahead, practice your pitch based on the time, hit the time, right? Like, because you want to be in control of the information that you're sharing. And the only way to do that is for you to practice a lot, right? Like a lot. You can't over practice in terms of just like, you know, especially if you have, you know, specific time you're trying to hit. It, you know, you don't have to memorize it. You shouldn't memorize your pitch. This is your story. You're telling a story. It is very, very personal to, like, it should be, we should be living it, right? Like, and so hopefully you know your story really well. So I'm not saying memorize, I'm just saying practice, and really think about who is your audience, how much time do you have, and what do you need them to walk away with in order to take an action, right? And it's different for every audience. So sometimes it is like, hey, I'm looking for team members, right? And so my big ask and what I need to, you know, communicate today is what a great company we would be to work for. And this is the kind of thing that we need to take this, you know, project forward. Sometimes it is dollars, sometimes it's just feedback, whatever it is, you know your audience, and make sure that as you think about like what pieces of your story are you going to emphasize, or what areas are you going to trim, you know, or what areas are you going to emphasize, you know, for that time frame. You're in control of what you do with the minutes that you've been given. So make sure you own it and do the work that it takes to make sure that you're in control of how that gets delivered, right? Because it's such a bummer to see somebody start strong and then, you know, get stuck in the end like that. And, you know, whatever, it happens to everybody, but but I think, you know, you have an opportunity to own it from start to finish. And if you can, I totally recommend that you do. So I think guidelines, you know, presentation matters. Laura already said with regards to details on the slides, you know, minimize when you're presenting what's on the slides, but you can have a leave behind deck ready that has more information in it if that's something that makes sense. Take time on the visuals. It does represent your brand, whether you're B2B or B2C, but especially with B2C. It's, you know, you don't have to spend a lot of money on a graphic designer or what have you. There's some really, really great tools out there. One of my new favorites is beautiful.ai. That can help you create a professional looking deck with like not a lot of skill. So there's stuff out there that, you know, there's a ton of presentation deck templates and the like, but, you know, think about how you want to represent your brand, because this may be one of the first opportunities that you have to do that. Technical founders, avoid jargon. Not everybody in the room is as much of an expert in your space as you are. So really try and either explain the jargon if you have to use it, or avoid it altogether. You know, tone of voice, body language, eye contact, all of that does matter. It's really interesting, Zoom versus in person. I'm still not really comfortable presenting on Zoom. I am definitely an in-person people person, and I really like making personal connections. But you know, I think moving forward and increasingly, you know, you will be presenting both digitally and in person, sometimes one-on-one, sometimes to a group, sometimes on the stage. There's all of these different things to consider, but what I would say is the more you practice, the easier it gets. And, you know, that making that human connection first helps people to relax and listen to your story and get, and really, you know, I am definitely this way, but, you know, I'm like on your side, right? Like I want to see you win, right? So I want to love your story, and I'm really like ready to love your story, and, you know, so bring me along on that journey, right? And bring me into that, and, you know, get me excited about it, because I know, you know, a lot of people who are listening to pitches want to be helpful, even if they're not writing a check. And I can send this out with some of my favorite resources for the nonprofits on the line. SVP Fast Pitch is a program that has been run a number of years in the Sacramento region, and you can Google it or YouTube it or what have you. And every year that we've done it, we've had 10 nonprofit executive directors or founders on stage at Golden One presenting their 3-minute pitch. No slides, but they are fantastic storytellers, and in part because they went through 4 months of prepping to give a 3-minute pitch on stage at Golden One. Right? They practice a ton, so you can go watch their videos. They're really awesome. They just do such an amazing job. But the thing about that 3-minute pitch is it's pretty easy, and they'll tell you to carve out your 30-second elevator pitch and to build on the pillars of that 3-minute story to create a 30-minute pitch. They use it for grant writing. They use it for marketing materials. They use it for social media, right? And that core of that story is in that 3-minute pitch, and it's really just a powerful tool to build on. So I totally encourage you to go look at that. And get inspired by that. And by all means, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to look at any decks or provide any, you know, any feedback. I'm not always super fast on email, but I promise to respond. So, and that's really all I've got for you today, but I would really love, you know, to answer any questions that you might have, or, you know, always interested to hear other people's experience as they pitch, like what has been the most difficult thing or most rewarding thing when you get feedback from people who hear your pitch.